Mr. Morgan, I'm glad to have a chance to talk to you today and have a bunch of questions for you. But why don't we begin with how your family got to Ackworth and who was the first in your family to come here?
Well, my family came from two different places. My father's family came from South Carolina.
Okay.
My mother's family came by way of Cherokee County.
Okay.
My mother's folks were Methodist ministers, and so they traveled the circuit. My grandfather was not a minister; he was a carpenter, but he was the first one to move to the Kennesaw area. My father's family started out in Bartow County and moved to what is now Lake Allatoona. Mm-hmm. They had a farm at what's called Cantrell's Bottom in the lake now, and then moved to Lucille Avenue here in Ackworth. And so my great-grandparents lived in a house about halfway down the road. My grandparents lived in the second house on the left. Several of my aunts and cousins lived in two other houses. So I couldn't get away with anything on that street. And in 1956, after my father got out of the Air Force, we moved to Lucille Avenue. He bought a house in 1956, and that stayed in our family until I sold it in 2016.
Wow. How old were you in 1956?
I was 2 years old.
Okay.
And we had, interesting story, my father was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And he told the story. He was, like many of his generation, he never told a lot of the stories when he was in the service. He was actually he drove an ambulance in Korea. So for all the MASH units, and after he passed away, I got his big trunk and I pulled out all of these pictures standing next to his ambulance with the bullet holes in the side of it. So a lot of things that we didn't know. Well, he
never talked about these things?
He never talked about it. And so we apparently lived in a house with a tin roof in a pecan grove. And one weekend, a storm came through. And apparently I was crying, my mother was crying because those pecans were hitting that tin roof all night long. And my mother said to my dad, do you have this weekend off? And he said, yes, I do. She said, well, I'm going back to Kennesaw, and I'm taking him with me, and you can stay here if you want to, but you're taking me back home. I'm not doing this anymore. So he had planned a career in the Air Force, but it was shut quickly down. He came back and got a job for a time with the Bell Bomber Plant, which later became Lockheed. They went through a time where they were laying folks off before it became Lockheed. And he got a job then at Unique Knitting Company, and we moved into the house on Lucille Avenue.
Okay, now Bell closes at the end of World War II. Are you talking about when Tom Paine was in there, in the plant before Lockheed came in?
Perhaps so. I know it was in the mid-50s when he worked there.
Lockheed comes in 51.
Oh, okay. Then perhaps he always told me it was the Bell Bomber Plant, and maybe that's just because that's what
the Bell Bomber Plant, or Air Force Plant 6.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's why he referred to it as that, but perhaps it was Lockheed at the time.
Yeah. Okay. But they were laying people off at any rate, as they would
Correct.
From time to time.
Correct. My grandfather, his father, had worked there for a time as well, and had gotten him the job, and then I think they both got laid off, and he went to work for Unique.
Let me just ask you first. He was in the Air Force, but he's driving an ambulance.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that. So the Air Force was operating the ambulance service for the Army?
Well, he was trained as an X-ray technician, and he said when he was deployed to Korea, he had gone from wherever his basic training was to an Air Force base in California, and then on to Korea, that he got off the plane and a officer came up and said, "Son, can you drive a truck?" And he said, "Yes, sir, I can." And he said, "Well, go get in that ambulance and start driving." And that was his job the whole time he was there.
Wow. Okay. Uh, You know, we know how people were treated when they came back from Vietnam. Korea was not exactly the most popular war either, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
How was he treated when he got home?
You know, I don't know that he ever told me that. My sense was it wasn't something that he talked about. He wasn't ashamed of his service, but it was just not something he talked about.
Right, right. Well, I think probably a lot of others, it's the same story.
Sure.
Unique Knitting Mill, what did he do at Unique?
Well, he was a fixer. And so he fixed the machines. That was his job title. And he had no formal training, but he had worked on small engines all his life. So he worked on those machines, and my mother worked there as well. And she was a knitter. So she made the socks, and when the machine broke, he fixed it. Now, she was one of the ones who worked the day shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., but he always worked the night shift from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. So as a young child, I had to be quiet all the time because somebody was sleeping, and so I couldn't be a raucous young boy.
Oh, my goodness. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
No, only child.
Okay.
Only child. I don't know if they decided after they had me that one was enough or what, but I'm an only child.
But they didn't have you working well, by the time you came along, you'd have to be 16 to work there anyway.
Right, right. I never did get a job there. Some of my friends worked there during the summertime, but I never did. I don't know if he just didn't want me in the mill or what.
Uh-huh. So did he work there forever after?
He did. He worked there until they closed, and then moved to Jean's Hosiery Mill, which I think was in Villa Rica, Georgia. So he drove over there.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like he had a lot of mechanical ability.
He did, and it was interesting. You know, he would complain about it like a lot of people do about their jobs. You know, I just hate doing that and hate doing that. As soon as he retired, he bought 4 machines. And he put them in his barn, and he made socks and sold them at flea markets across.
right?
He did.
Okay.
He did.
Now, your mother didn't like living in a house with a tin roof, with a pecan tree.
Right.
So how did that turn out now? What kind of, you moved to a regular house after that?
We did. We moved first to Kennesaw. I'm sure you're familiar with the Nest restaurant that's right there on Cherokee. We were in a house across the street from that. There are now a couple of office buildings there, but the big oak tree is still there. And we stayed there for a short period of time before they bought the house in Ackworth and moved up here.
Tell me a little bit about what Ackworth was like in the 50s.
Well, it was, you know, for a town that was considered small, I don't know, 2,000 residents maybe at the time.
At most at that time.
We had 2 drugstores. We had 2 5 and dime stores. We had 2 jewelry stores. We had about 2 of everything. I mean, 2 barbers. We had 2 folks that ran the taxi services, and it was if you stood and looked at what is left of town now. Of course, back in those days, there were a whole set of buildings on the other side where the parking lots are now. If you looked at what is now town, where the divide is, you had one set of stores on this side, and you had the exact same set of stores on this side here. And it was just a matter of this town was able to sustain those businesses during that time, which is amazing to me considering how many folks lived here.
Did the same people use the stores on both sides of the street?
I think so. I can tell you, my mother went into Allen's 5 and 10, and we went into Johnny Green's 5 and 10. We went to Ackworth Pharmacy. We went to Lacey's Pharmacy. I mean, now, we were pretty particular. We went to Dr. Cauble, although Dr. McCall was just right around the corner, but Dr. Cauble was our doctor of choice.
Okay, didn't have anything against Dr. McCall?
No, not at all. I was good buddies with Dr. McCall's children. We all grew up together, and Dr. Cobble's son was my age, but it was just who your preference was. And by the time I was, a teenager, Dr. McCall had arthritis, I believe, pretty badly, and he wasn't really able to practice practice medicine as well. And of course, his wife, Mary, who we called Dr. McCall, because she was a she was a registered nurse, but she would treat us during the time. I think the statute of limitations on any violation of the law is passed, but you would go see Dr. McCall, and it would be Mary McCall, who, of course, had a long term as our mayor here as well.
Okay. Did you feel that there was any prejudice against Mill kids in the school system or in society?
Against?
Any prejudice against Mill children?
You know, I really don't. I didn't get that sense that we were. Now, we didn't live in what everybody referred to as the Mill Village, but
Right.
I had lots of friends who did, and one of the superintendents of Coates and Clark, I know his son's name's Jerry Davis. I can't remember what Mr. Davis's first name was, but he was a good friend of ours, and we were just kids, and we just were happy to be friends. And interestingly enough, when I made it to high school is finally when Brown versus Education was enforced in the state of Georgia, and I think our folks were very accepting of folks coming into the school district. I don't think we had the issues that other places did.
Okay, so by the time you were in high school would be, I'm doing my math, it'd be late 60s, early 70s.
1969, because we were still in a junior high school situation, so 7 through 9, 10 through 12. So I came to high school in 1969.
Okay, so you're getting there right, almost at the beginning of full integration.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A couple of years earlier.
Right. And
Okay, and so you didn't, what about growing up? Did you ever play with the kids from, I guess what we call the park side of the city nowadays?
No, because elementary school wise, we weren't together at that time. So not that I wouldn't have, but I just didn't know anyone.
Didn't know them.
Right.
And I guess the Eli Whitney School had been closed a long time by the time you came along.
Yeah. It had, although the building was still used for community center, I do believe, before it became JD's Barbecue.
A community center for the Mill Village?
I believe so.
Oh, okay.
I remember one year, they had a barbecue every fall, and the North Cobb band that I was in would always play for the barbecue, and in I believe it was 1970, Jimmy Carter was running for governor of the state of Georgia, and he came to the barbecue, and
It would have been 70.
introduced himself to everybody, and so that's my one memory of that Coates and Clark barbecue, and I do believe that was used as a community center. I may be wrong about that, though.
Okay. And then many uses before it became JD's Barbecue.
True.
I think there was a church in there at one time.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful building, though. Beautiful building.
In fact, Tim Houston may have been
He may have been.
pastor of that church. Okay, well, you've mentioned band several times, and I really wanted to get on to that. How did you get interested in music and the band and on those kinds of things?
Well, in the 6th grade, I was at Ackworth Elementary School, and that's when students in Cobb County School District were afforded the opportunity to participate in band. So I, like many of my friends. We went to the orientation that was provided. My band director, who started me and was the only band director I had from elementary school through high school, was Jack Redwine. And he came to the school, North Cobb High School, in 1965 and was the band director until 1976 or 77. He
Said 78 on your phone.
78 then.
Okay.
I looked at what he did and I thought, man, this is really awesome. You get to go out and you get to teach people and you have fun and make music and that sort of thing. Not realizing that at the time he taught at North Cobb High School, one class there. He taught 3 classes at Autry Junior High at the time. And then he went to every elementary school in the feeder program, which would have been Ackworth, Kennesaw, Due West, and then later Big Shanty, and taught at least twice a week at those. So he was on the road all the time, but it looked like it was a good life, but it was pretty busy during that time. So I started with my friends and stuck with it, and it became something that led to a time to be my profession.
Did you play an instrument before you joined the band?
No, my uncle was a guitar player, and he would show me some things on the guitar, but I'd never had any formal training until 6th grade.
What was your instrument?
Trumpet.
Okay.
Still is today. I still play a couple of times a year at the Ackworth Methodist Church, and just did this past Sunday. And then I volunteer for a group called Bugles Across America, and we provide live taps for veterans' funerals.
Well, good for you.
It is one of the most challenging pieces you will play. Those 21 notes are very difficult.
I bet. Well, there's another trumpeter that I know you know a good deal about, Ken Stanton. Why don't you talk about him and how the music program got started in Cobb County schools?
Well, Ken Stanton, as we know it today, is a music company, and at one time had a number of stores. I don't even know how many, but it would have been 10 to 15 stores all across North Georgia. And when Mr. Stanton was a young boy, he decided he wanted to play trumpet. And he had gone to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, associated with the University of Rochester, and is considered one of the top music schools in the United States. If you had an all-star, the equivalent of an all-star football team, Eastman University would be the place to find all of these folks. Many principal players in symphony orchestras all across the United States start there. Well, he had gone there. He had been in the war and had played his trumpet in the war. And he married a young Southern girl from Metter, Georgia, Jane Trapnell, and moved to this area. Well, he eventually wanted to start this business, but he was a little disappointed to find that there were no music programs in the schools. So he went to Mr. W.P. Sprayberry, who was the superintendent of Cobb County Schools at the time, and had also been the principal at Ackworth High School, because Mr. Sprayberry lived right down the road here, right near the lake. Well, I probably wasn't a lake back then, but he lived right down the road, and convinced him that if he would allow Mr. Stanton to charge $1 per student, and I can't remember if it was per month or per year, but $1 per student, that he would start band programs in 5 different schools, 5 different high schools in Cobb, and that would
about all we had at that time.
it was that there was Ackworth, there was Osborne, there was Fitzhugh Lee, there was Smyrna, and McEachern. Those were the 5 schools, and he began those band programs there with the promise that after he got these going, that Mr. Sprayberry would start hiring music teachers for these schools. And so he did. He began that process, and sometime in the mid-50s, he let go of the Ackworth High School band and hired a fellow named Wes Baxter. And Wes was also from the north, but he was a saxophone player, and his passion was jazz. Let me back up. I believe in 1951 or 52, they decided that they needed a new high school up in the northern part of the county. So they started talking about building North Cobb High School and not closing Ackworth, but making it a elementary school. And apparently was controversial at the time because the folks in Ackworth loved their school. Mm-hmm. Well, a little interesting side note is after they opened North Cobb in 1958, it physically sits in the postal zone for Kennesaw, Georgia. But the compromise to the Ackworth folks is it would keep its Ackworth address by having a post office box in Ackworth. So an assistant principal, and when I was in school at North Cobb, it was Emery Sewell, who the stadium is named after. And Emery would get in his car and drive up to the post office here in Ackworth, get all the mail for North Cobb, and take it back. So it still had that Ackworth postal address. Now, I think after they built Kennesaw Mountain and they built Allatoona, which actually does have an Ackworth postal address, North Cobb is now considered in Kennesaw, and they don't make that trip anymore. But so they were talking about building North Cobb High School, and I think that opened in 1958. Well, when the school opened, Wes Baxter moved from Ackworth to North Cobb, and decided that this music thing was nice, but he wanted to do something else. So he went to law school at night. And he got his law degree in 1962 from the Atlanta Law School, and he became a lawyer. But he had for years and years and years a big band that he played, that he directed and played in, really almost up until the time he passed away, I believe, in the early teens. So 2011, 2012, sometime in there he passed away, and his law office was in Smyrna, not too far from where I began my career at Wills High School as the band director there. And so he was the band director for some eight or so years combined from Ackworth to North Cobb. And when I was in high school, we had this big bass drum head, and it had a warrior on it, and it said North Cobb Band, Ackworth, Georgia, but you could see where Ackworth Band had been scratched out and North Cobb Band over that. And I brought some pictures of the Ackworth Band, I think with Mr. Stanton as the director, and you can see that drum in the photograph. So I don't know what happened to it. I asked the recently retired director not long ago, and he said he never remembered seeing that. But so after North Cobb was built and Mr. Baxter went on to his legal career, they hired a fellow named James G. Poulos. He only stayed here a couple of years because he got a position, I think he was from North Carolina, he got a position at Catawba College in North Carolina and retired from there. As I said, Mr. Redwine was the band director when I was here, and then he was not a fan of marching band. He really liked the concert band. So they hired a fellow named Scott Ragsdale to teach the marching band. And when Jack Redwine left in '78, Scott took over the program. I was at Wills High School teaching as a young, brand new teacher, and Jack Redwine actually came to Nash Middle School, which fed my program, and he and I got to work together as colleagues for 2 years.
How was that?
That it was great because he knew me, I knew him. Our philosophies were the same because he had been my mentor and my inspiration. So it was a great relationship working together, and we had a lot of fun. It was a different perspective than teacher-student, although I still called him Mr. Redwine. I never could refer to him as Jack to his face, but a good man. and Scott decided that he had a psychology degree, and he decided he wanted to practice in that profession, so he got his master's degree and went on to have a counseling practice for a long number of years. And so I followed him in 1980.
So you went from Wells to
North Cobb.
North Cobb?
I
Yeah.
did, and I stayed there for 5 years. I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer as well.
Were you influenced by Wes Baxter in that decision?
I didn't know that story at that time,
Okay.
but it is interesting to see that a couple of us went that route. There had been a band director that was one of my contemporaries up in the Rome, Georgia area, who had gone that route and gone to law school. I had cousins who were lawyers, and at our family reunions we'd talk about what they did, and I just thought it was interesting. So I took the plunge. I went to John Marshall Law School in Atlanta at night while I taught during the day. Probably never worked harder in my life. And in my first year of law school was 1984-85, and that was my last year at North Cobb because I felt like I wasn't doing myself nor the students any good because I wasn't giving everything
Much time. Mhm.
to either that those kids deserve. So the school district created their first assistant band director positions, and I took one of those at Sprayberry High School and its feeder program, so that would be McCleskey and J.J. Daniel, and worked for that until I finished my law degree. And during one of the summers, I was did an internship with our district attorney's office and just fell in love with that work. And so I got a job with them after I passed the bar and went with them.
I guess that's Tom Sharon at that time?
Yes, and
District attorney?
it is interesting with that Tom was our longest serving prosecutor in Cobb County. The Cobb County Judicial Circuit was formed in the 1953 or 1954, I believe. It was carved out of the circuit in the northern part of the
Is that
state,
still the Blue Ridge Circuit?
the Blue Ridge Circuit. And so Tom was our longest serving DA and prosecutor until I passed him last year. So Tom served for 22 years, and I'm currently sitting at 24 years. So
Did they ever tell you about how he got the job? I think he replaced Buddy Darden.
he did. He
Did
did.
he ever talk about that story?
He would talk about the Matthews murder case and how he used that as his campaign.
That was a very controversial,
It was.
well, I guess they never did, well, they convicted some people, but they never did have a conviction that would hold.
Right, and never a resolution. It's interesting because especially in those types of cases, you have to keep those files forever. I mean, in a murder case like that, so you can't destroy anything.
Roy Barnes was involved in that too, and
He-
Ben Smith.
He was, and so there is a room where the Matthews murder case files are all kept.
Is that right?
Yes, sure are, because like I say, they all, now, whether with the advent of digital scanning and that sort of thing, whether that's still required, I don't know, because I haven't done felony work in 25 years, but it was in a room,
Oh, that
sure
would
enough.
be fascinating to look at that.
It would be.
They were pathologists and were murdered on their property.
And interesting, Ben Smith Sr., because I worked for Ben Smith Jr., he was my immediate predecessor in this job. He actually prosecuted the fellow that blew up the district attorney up in northeast Georgia, Floyd Horde. And Floyd Horde's son used to live, I believe, in Ackworth and has written a book about his dad's murder. Well, Ben's Ben's father prosecuted the bootleggers that had murdered him, and the way he was murdered was they put some bombs in his car, and when he cranked his car, the car blew up. So Ben's wife would go out every morning before Ben would leave and crank his car in the event that there were bombs there, because she didn't want him to die.
You talking about Harriet?
Yes,
She would crank?
she would crank the car before he got up.
So she'd blow herself up?
I suppose so. I don't know.
I had never heard that story.
Yeah. Ben Jr. tells that story a lot.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's something.
Hmm.
Wow. And then she was a county commissioner
Yes,
later on.
yes. She was like a great aunt to me. She was good,
Oh,
good
really?
people. Yeah, good
Okay.
people.
Well, okay, so you graduated from law school, you did an internship with the district attorney's office,
Hmm.
and then you become a prosecutor
Yes.
for Tom Sharon, I guess.
I did. I prosecuted the cases for the organized crime and drug unit for the county, and I did that for 5 years. And like I said, my friend Ben Smith Jr. decided to run for solicitor. It was called solicitor at the time, and Pat Head had been our solicitor and decided he wanted to be a Superior Court judge. So he ran for Superior Court judge, and Ben ran for solicitor. Pat didn't win Superior Court judge, but Ben did and brought me on as his chief assistant. And then when Tom Sharon retired in 1998, Ben was appointed by Zell Miller as district attorney, and I was appointed. By that time, the title had become Solicitor General, and I was appointed Solicitor General. And Ben lost his election to Pat Head, and I won my election, and I've been fortunate enough to be reelected 5 other times now. So.
Wow. So 10 years working first for the Superior Court, and then what year did you become the assistant to Ben Smith?
1992. I spent 5 years in Superior Court. So from 1988 until 1992, and then 92 I went to the state court, and I've been there ever since.
Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit about the jurisdiction of the state court and its history and just exactly what you do in a state court?
Okay. Well, Superior Court is the court of general jurisdiction, and we think of cases that would go there would be like divorce cases and criminal cases and civil cases where, somebody's injured, or we're talking about a contract dispute or something like that. So every county in the state of Georgia has a Superior Court. There are 159 counties, so there are 159 Superior Courts. Now, they are broken up into judicial circuits, so not every county is its own judicial circuit, only the larger counties. So like Cobb County is its own judicial circuit, and we are the Cobb Judicial Circuit. Fulton County is its own judicial circuit. They are the Atlanta Judicial Circuit. Out near Madison, which is the largest judicial circuit, they cover 8 different counties. And so the judges in that circuit, what we call ride the circuit. So back in the formation of the judicial system in the state of Georgia, we had the Eastern Judicial Circuit, which was housed around Savannah. We had the Western Judicial Circuit, which was housed around Athens. And then in between in Swainsboro, we had the Middle Judicial Circuit. So those were our first 3 judicial circuits. And the judges and the prosecutors and the lawyers would ride the circuit. They would go from courthouse to courthouse and hold court in the various counties. And so in some of these larger judicial circuits, they still do that. Now, one of the things that governors like to do is spread the wealth of support, so they will try to, when they are appointing judges to these circuits, they will try to appoint throughout the circuit, so then folks will vote for them. So not every court circuit has a state court. State court is also a court of general jurisdiction, and we have civil cases and we have criminal cases. The difference between the two is a superior court handles felonies, the very serious criminal matters, and any misdemeanors that are associated with it. State court prosecutes misdemeanor-only cases that stand alone. Let's say that somebody came in today and walked into Henry's and ordered a big meal and got up and left without paying. That would be a theft of services. It would be under $500, so that would be a misdemeanor. Now, if they brought in 25 people and left, and the bill was over $1,500, then that would be a felony. So that sort of gives you an idea of the breakdown. The thing that let me back up. There are 62 state courts across the state, so not every county has a state court. In many circuits around the state, the probate court will handle traffic matters, the magistrate court will handle traffic matters. It just depends on the jurisdiction. But in the larger jurisdictions, they do have state courts. And of the 62, 24 are full-time, meaning they've got a full-time judge, they've got a full-time prosecutor. Mm-hmm. In other places, they have part-time judges, part-time prosecutors. In Cobb, we are one of the larger offices in the state because of our caseload, and we have 75 folks that work in our office, right at 30 lawyers. And if you think it's easy to herd lawyers, it's a lot like herding cats because they're all opinionated and they think their opinion's the best.
Okay. How many judges are there for the state court in Cobb County?
We have 12.
12 for state court?
We do, and of the 12, 9 have worked in my office since I've been the Solicitor General. Uh-huh. So we're kind of a
trained them.
We've trained one or two, and our chief magistrate currently is a alumni of our office, and our district attorney, both this one and the one just previous, were both alumni of our office as well.
Is that right?
It is.
How has it affected your job that we've become more diverse in Cobb County, and certainly the judges are a lot more diverse than they used to be as well?
I think that we're blessed in the county to have people in the position who look at their role as ministers of justice. And whether that be one person sitting as a judge or one person sitting as a prosecutor, as long as you focus your goal as a minister of justice, I think that we do what's right by the Constitution. That's all to say that our office has been fairly diverse since the late 90s. I have a young man, his name is Mazi Mazloum. He's a defense attorney in Cobb County, and we hired him. He laid claim to being the first Iranian prosecutor in the state of Georgia. We've had folks that have provided a lot of diversity. I think it's important that when people come to court, they see people that they identify with. And so my first and foremost is to hire good people. I think if you're a good person, you're going to do the right thing. And so that's what we have always been, first and foremost. Secondly, especially in our world where we're dealing in a traffic court where everybody that comes there is mad and has an excuse for why they did what they did, you have to have a great deal of people skills. Mm-hmm. And so that's the second thing that we look at. Way down on the list is the legal training, because we can train you how to do the job, but we can't really train those other things. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't, because we've been in that world for a time, the changing politics and that sort of thing in Cobb County, I don't believe is reflected in an adverse way in the court system. I think we've been doing that for a long time.
Do you run on a party label?
We do.
I thought you did.
What do you
think about that?
I'm not a big fan of it, and I'm going to give you a story to tell you why. I'm sure you remember Judge Conley Ingram.
Yeah, sure.
Well, you know, Judge Ingram was a a juvenile court judge in Cobb, and then went on to the Supreme Court of Georgia, came back and was a senior judge after his successful law practice. And he and I used to park beside one another. And so in my first election in 1998, my political consultant said, you know, Cobb County's a Republican county. You've got to have Republican on your sign. So I did, you know, like a novice. And so it said, keep Barry Morgan, Republican Solicitor General. Mm-hmm. So we get out of our cars one day, and I'm walking down, and Judge Ingram said, can I ask you a question? And I said, well, of course, Judge. And he goes, do you only prosecute Republican criminals, or do you prosecute Democrat criminals too? And I said, no, Judge, we're an equal opportunity prosecution office. And so that got me to thinking about that. But back in the middle 80s, when Tom Murphy was the Speaker of the House, and they revised the Constitution and made judicial offices nonpartisan, because until the mid-80s, I mean, a Superior Court judge ran on a partisan level. Tom Murphy said, I want all of you to that want to get on board on the nonpartisan stuff, get on board now, because it's not happening after this. And the district attorneys, who sort of controlled the prosecution profession at the time, didn't want to do that. They were largely Democrat, and they didn't feel that the state was ever going to change. And
Not very foresighted.
not very foresighted. And as the state began to change just a little bit in the late 80s, early 90s for the state, a lot of them changed parties, and so they could get reelected. And as we saw in the last election, both in Gwinnett and in Cobb, you know, our DA went from a Republican to a Democrat. Same thing in Gwinnett County, and those were long-serving DAs. So the work we do is not partisan, and we don't look at a label when we're making a prosecutorial decision. So, but the powers that be that control that, you know, that's above my pay grade. So right now they're not in a place where they want to make those nonpartisan. There's been talk about it, but
Well, everything's going the other way now, back to the Democrats.
and I think, you know, when you look at history, and I know you do, that it's cyclical, and one day it'll probably swing back the other way, and everybody will live and be happy, and you know, while politics has some influence over our lives, it only as much as we let it, I think, at times.
Have you announced your plans for the next election cycle yet?
I have, and my chief assistant, who is also a North Cobb graduate, Chris Lanning, is running to replace me. He has an opponent who has been a prosecutor out in Paulding County, but lives in the county,
Okay,
and he's running as a Democrat.
all right. So that's going to be decided in 2002?
2022.
Oh, 22, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm behind the times.
Well, I have trouble figuring out how to say all that, whether it's 2022 or 2022, you know?
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, so you've been there 20 years, let me do my math. 1998, you've been there 23 years. So 24 years by the time your term ends.
25 actually, because I was sworn in on March the 4th, 1998, so I have 10 months of that 25th year that I will be, and I'm going to claim it as 25 years.
How many times did you not have any opposition at all?
Of the 6 times I was up for election, I had opposition twice. So 4 times I was unopposed.
Well, that's good.
It's cheaper, I can tell you that much.
I bet. You don't have to go out and ask people for their vote.
Absolutely, and you don't have to ask people for money, which you could take a board and hit me in the head with. I would much rather have that than asking people for money.
Yeah. Well, that's another question, I guess, when you ask people for money and then they come before your court, or you have to prosecute or whatever, make a decision on who to prosecute.
It depends on that level of involvement that they were with the campaign, because we as lawyers and as public officials have an ethical duty not to give the appearance of impropriety. While I think I can be fair with anybody, if the public doesn't have confidence in the judicial system and they feel like I'm either going to be one of two ways with my relatives or folks that have supported me. I'm either going to be really hard on them, which is not fair to them, or people are going to perceive that I'm really easy on them. So the appearance is not good either way. So we just recuse ourselves and have someone else come and take that mantle up.
Mm-hmm. You never wanted to be a judge?
I think there was a time I did, but I had a lot of friends who are now judges who talk about what a lonely life it is, because judges really have to isolate themselves because they're the ones actually deciding the case. As a prosecutor, I'm a partisan. I'm in the fight. I mean, I'm taking sides, and ultimately I'm doing what I believe is justice, but I'm taking sides. A judge has to be in neutral, so they really have to isolate, and sometimes all you're talking to are fellow judges about work. As prosecutors, we get together, we're collegial, we have meetings, we have trainings, and so it's that's a long way of saying I thought about it, but the more I thought about it, I thought this was the better way to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. Well, let's go back and focus a little more on Ackworth.
Okay.
And maybe this way to conclude things.
Sure.
Go back to Ackworth, and something that I meant to make part of the interview at one time, and it slipped my mind. You were, of course, in the marching band at North Cobb High School, but there's also a jazz band. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, North Cobb's had a rich history of a great jazz program there. As I said, Wes Baxter was a jazz guy and had done that. Jack Redwine was a phenomenal jazz band director and player. He was actually in the National Guard band for years and years and years and played in their jazz band. Well, he came to North Cobb in 1965, and the next year, in the fall of '66, I was in the 7th grade at Autry, and he began the North Cobb Jazz Band. And he didn't have a lot of trumpet players that wanted to participate, so as a 7th grader, I got to be in the formation of the North Cobb Jazz Band. And so I played all through high school, and we had a great time performing in the community and that sort of thing. By the time I had gotten back 5 years later, or 8 years later, as the band director, the program had exploded. And I mean, we're talking almost, not professional, but semi-professional jazz band that he created. And during the early 80s, the University of Georgia, Roger Dance was the band director at the time, and he was a jazz guy as well. And he created a jazz band festival. And he would always get one big-name jazz guy to come in and be one of the judges. And then that person, at the end of your performance, would come up on the stage and clinic your band. So the one year that I took the North Cobb Jazz Band over there, Ed Shaughnessy, who was the drummer for the Tonight Show band, was the clinician. And he came up on stage, moved my drummer out of the way, sat down, and played with the North Cobb Jazz Band. And so we had that experience during that time. And of course, he was talking to my drummer the whole time he was playing, but it was a phenomenal experience. And created in me a lifelong love of jazz. When my sons were in high school band, one went to Kennesaw Mountain, the other went to Allatoona. We didn't move. They just started building more schools. Right. Well, both directors at both schools allowed me to conduct the jazz band for my boys, and so I did the jazz band at Kennesaw Mountain, and I did the jazz band at Allatoona for a couple of years. So it was a lot of fun.
I bet. You still do any performances anymore?
Well, just church cantatas.
Oh, you said you did one just recently at
We had
Methodist Church.
our Christmas cantata last Sunday, and we had a full orchestra, as we've had for a number of years. One of my best friends in the world, Dan Martin, who retired as band director of Sprayberry High School, had been the music minister at Ackworth for almost 32 years, and he retired this past year, and my oldest son's band director, David Starnes, just took over as the music minister there. So we play twice a year, Easter and Christmas, and have a good time.
Great. Now, you lived in Ackworth until 2016, I believe it was?
I did.
Tell me, first of all, why you stayed in Ackworth all that time? What kept you here?
I just love the area. The walking trail by the lake is wonderful. The new parks at Logan Park that they put together is just wonderful. Even though Ackworth had a more bustling town than Kennesaw, back when I grew up, Kennesaw was where the rich kids lived, and we didn't associate too much with those kids. But they had some things that we didn't. They had KJC at the time and that sort of thing. But I just love the people, and I love the atmosphere of the town. The 90-minute commute to the 8 miles to downtown Marietta at times, I would often tell people, when I got to Highway 41, I had a choice. If I turned this way, it's 90 minutes to downtown Marietta, or if I turn this way, it's 90 minutes to Chattanooga. So, it was a different world, and that was wearing on me. Life circumstances changed a little bit, and I was on my own now, and so I had the opportunity to move to Marietta in a house that's 7 minutes from work, and you can't imagine the lifestyle change of getting that amount of time back in your life, which is wonderful. But I still come up here. I mean, you can't beat Fusco's and Henry's and all the restaurants up this way, and the lake.
I was going to ask you how Ackworth had changed, and you're beginning to say so with all the restaurants.
I can tell you that when I was growing up, I never would have thought in my wildest dreams that this place would be the restaurant mecca that it is. But, I mean, there's a group of us that have a dinner club. We call ourselves Club Di Amici. And we get together at Fusco's about once a month and just love it. And of course, there were other restaurants at the time when I was here, living here full time. But and I guess we've got the new 1885 house and quite a few others. I don't want to leave anybody out because they're all great. But see, I'm still a politician, right? But I love the way that the folks who had a vision for what Ackworth could be saw that some of the big box stores and the malls were what they were going to do to the small businesses, and had an idea of how to revitalize and make the place a destination. And I think they've been extraordinarily successful with that.
You had said when you filled out a questionnaire before the interview that there was something that people don't know about you until now, and you don't really sound like what you say you are in this interview today. But why don't you talk a little bit about what people don't know about you that's unusual for a politician?
I'm an introvert, and in the sense that I can be out in public, I can interact with folks, but it is going to take me a couple of hours to recharge by myself. My energy doesn't come from being around people. And I love people. I love talking to people. I love sharing things with people. But it will take me a while to even from this intimate setting here, it'll take me a while in the car to recharge my batteries. And so to go out and shake hands and tell everybody that who I am and what I do and how I'm running for reelection, that would just drain me. Now, my youngest, it's interesting, my wife at the time and my oldest son and I are all three of us are introverts. My youngest son is the extrovert. He can go in and just draw the energy out of everybody in a room, and he was one of the best campaigners that we ever had. The rest of us would have to go and sit in a room and recharge after one of those events. But it is easy, well, I'm not going to say that. It is, an introvert has the ability to be out and do those types of things, but they're going to have to recharge in a different way.
Okay. Any advice for introverts?
Do what makes, find that thing that recharges you and allow yourself each day to do that, because then you'll be able to go out and express yourself and have the personality that folks want to be around.
Well, fantastic. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you today,
Well, thank you. It's been great.
and I hope it doesn't take too long for you to get recharged.
I don't think it will.
Okay, well, we'll end it right here then.
Awesome.
Sounds